Hi, it's Colleen Schmidt from Divination Counseling Service here today to present the nodes. Before I begin, I want to say thank you for watching this video. I want to say a special thank you to all of my subscribers who've been helping me to build this channel. Thanks, guys. I want to mention that if you're not a subscriber, I hope you consider becoming one. And if you would, in the meantime, please like, share, particularly comment, because I'd love to hear from you. But likes and shares are good for the algorithm. So today we're going to talk about the nodes. And the first thing I want to mention about the nodes is that this is actually a part 2 video. I did the first part would be February of last year. Okay. I also did one March of the year before that. So we have here two different articles. Now, the one that I did in 2020 was actually me redoing my website. So the actual original article was written in 2012. Something I'd like to redo and probably put on video eventually. It's the nodes with Chiron. So we're going to just look at the nodes though today, and we're going to continue with what I had spoken about last year, which was based a lot in George White's book, The Moon's Nodes. George White's book was written in 1927. There's a lot of comments in here about women that I felt very misogynist. When we look at these, we can look at them a little bit different. But it is interesting to read these books because it really gives you an idea of something as important as the nodes. We seem to, in the last 100 years, almost have minimized it. And it's being looked at in different ways. So what got me inspired was I had read an article in The Astrologer, and the particular person who wrote about it talked about how they were an astrologer for 5 years before they actually realized that they didn't really know enough about the nodes, and then went on to go back to study the nodes. Now, if you are of an Eastern philosophy and in astrology, Hindu, exactly, to be exact, you would be studying the North and the South Node because it is one of the most important and the most potent factors in a chart. That's the way it is. And then it would be called Ratu for the North Node and Ketu for the South Node, or the head of the dragon and the tail of the dragon. And the reason why is because it sets up a dragon in the chart, which is an ecliptic. It's almost as though every chart has its own eclipse point, and that would be the nodes. So this is a great article of how she went back to the Hellenistic book. Here we go. She studied a different one, though, but same idea, where you have to go back to the originals, because back in the day, the nodes, let me put that back, were the most important part of the chart. That's where they did all the predictions. And they made a lot of predictions based on eclipses. Okay. And that's where, they would predict famines and wars and all kinds of things. Now, we have eclipses to the tune of 3, as many as 7. I mean, it's varied. We have at least 3 a year. So you have to imagine that the idea of eclipses, yes, they're very important. They're asking us to grow up and to mature, but we're not having the wars and the plagues and all of the other things the way they did back in the day. Remember that astrology is thousands of years old, and 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, this is all they had, was the nodes. So along with George's book and along with our Hindu Eastern ladies article, we also have Martin Schulman's Karmic Astrology, which is what we as modern astrologers keep thinking that astrology is based on, is karma. That, you're stuck, you came in with the South Node, that's where you always kind of resonate back to, it keeps pulling you back, and the North Node is your way out and all that. We're going to find out today that it's a little bit more complicated than that, and it's a little bit more in depth than that, and there's a lot more to be said in addition to that. I can tell you from my own personal experience, and I'm not going to show you charts today. I'm going to talk about some of the charts, though, that I work with, In my own personal chart, if you were to read this, I should have been a criminal, a thief. And I'm not, and I never have been. And the other part of it is that I would have a terrible credit rating. No, I've never had a bad credit rating. I may have lived close to poverty most of my life, but I have never had a bad credit rating. So I think that it is going to be depending on the evolution of the person. And I have a theory, a working theory, that perhaps the nodal area of the chart is something the soul's been working on for a while. And perhaps the reason why I don't sound like Martin Schulman's version of myself is because perhaps this is not my first rodeo when it comes with dealing with these particular nodes. And I might be a little bit more advanced. Okay, I'll be using my own example later. I have a couple examples of how it sort of works. And the more that I look at it, the more that I'm like, wow, aha, oh boy. Okay. Now, first thing first, let's talk about the fact that the cycle of Jupiter is 11.6 years. 11 to 12 years, they say, 11.6. I had it all wrong. I actually did this whole video and then realized, wow, my math was so off when it came to the cycles, okay? Now, in my own chart, there's something about every 9 years, so I don't know that 9 to 11 year point. I don't know how much there that is in effect, okay? There's something else going on, but the nodes are a factor. The nodes are a thing where you could go through your life and you could say, what happened when I was 11 and a half? What happened when I was 23? What happened? Do you see what I'm saying? And if we did that, we would be able to understand a little bit about the cycle of the node. Now, according to the modern way, a lot of us don't use it. My teacher really uses it a lot, but uses it more in terms of connections. Your connections are better during north nodes. South nodes connections might not meet as well. There's an oppression factor. There's a couple of things. That may all well be well and true because it also goes along with what George White says. And he's the guy that I figure is the most authoritative in this situation. So, very briefly, in George's book, because he's doing the old Western style, Caput is the head. C-A-P-U-T is the head of the dragon in Western. And the tail would be Cada, C-A-U-D-A. Okay, now that would be North Node, South Node. In Hellenistic astrology, it was actually called the ascending node and the descending node. North Node, South Node. They're all obvious. The other one is Ketu and Ratu. Ratu being the north node, Ketu being the south, or the tail is south and the head is north. So all of these words and features have been applied to the nodes over the years. So in the interim, we've been dealing with this karmically. That's what they've been telling us. When we're dealing with these nodes, it's karma. It's karma. Okay? Is it? That's all I'm going to say. And the reason why I say that is because the South Node, as we're going to be learning, is not as bad as we think. As a matter of fact, it gets, mitigated quite often by other planets, by energies. So there's a mitigation factor. The mitigation factor can deal with aspects, okay, and aspects to certain entities within the chart. So, with that said, we are looking at something that I think is a little bit bigger than just karma. I think karma plays into it. I think when I looked at mine and I started really studying it, I started realizing that perhaps I have been here before in terms of the letting go, which is my lesson. And that maybe in this lifetime, it's just a lot easier to let go, because I certainly have had no issues letting go of things in this lifetime. And even money, even material, Okay, and which is the thing they say I can't let go of. I do have it conjuncting my north node, the node itself. The north node conjuncts Neptune, I'm sorry. So my way out has always been spiritual. And I have been rather spiritual my whole life. There was even a point of time where I was even religious. I since learned that I think I always knew that the dogma in religion is such a turnoff. So I'm now what I would call a spiritualist. Now, the stuff that we're going to be looking at, okay, is we're going to be looking at the old way of looking at the nodes. And that's what I want to talk about today. The old way. I know that Martha's interpretations of it being connections, that also works. George White talks about that. So she's right that things connect better with the North Node. Things are a little bit easier to come together. South Node's a little bit tougher to get things together, to get things to work. The idea of karma, I'm not sure, because I like Martin Schulman's books. I have a lot of them. And I like the idea that karma plays into this. I even own a Pluto book that is written by Jeff Green, and he has a series. But they even talk about how he missed a lot in his series with regards to the nodes because modern astrologers tend to ignore them. And I'll give you an example. In George White's book, he talks about two different things, one being the astrology magazine, Modern Astrology, which I think was a bigger deal in the early 20th century. But when they did the date of their establishment, their event, if you will, they didn't do it with, they didn't do it correctly. They didn't look at the nodes. So the success of the magazine wasn't what it could be. And they did it with other setups of other astrological societies or groups or clubs since then, and the same results. They could have been so much more successful, but they didn't take into account the nodes. So please bear that in mind if you're studying astrology, okay? In the old days, so I'm just going to go through this really quickly. The North Node is considered the ascending node. It's also considered kaput. It's also considered to be ratu, R-A-T-U, okay? The South Node is the descending node. It is also called Kada, C-A-U-D-A, and it's referred to as Ketu, K-E-T-U, or the tail, okay? Now, one of the things that they say is that if you're doing electional charts, you would be advised not to do anything when there is an aspect from the node, and that means any node, to the moon. Stay away from it. It's kind of a null and void type thing if you're born with it, but it's not a very cool thing to do if you're setting up electional charts. They are considered the ecliptic of the chart. They're considered the eclipse in our chart. Think about that. Eclipses are so important. They cause us to mature, to grow up. We have them all. We all have one in our charts. Consider the North and South Node. Okay? They represent points of intersection between the sun and the moon. And the negative connotation is when the sun or the moon are in close proximity or connected, when we're connected with them in certain ways. And this includes both nodes. So, and again, it's not as, and you'll see this, it's not as big a deal in a natal chart as it is an electoral chart, one where you're choosing a date for something, okay? You don't want to really have a sun or a moon involved with the nodes. It's just not, you just don't want it to be in close proximity. Those are conjunctions I'm referring to there. The moon, I don't think you want it to be an aspect at all. That's just better that way, just as cleaner. In some work, the ascending node, the North Node, is considered good when it runs with a beneficial planet, okay? Jupiter, Venus, Okay? The south node or descending node is bad with the benefits, same planets, Venus, Jupiter, but good when it's with the malefics, Saturn. Okay? So you have to consider that. The south node is just kind of like a diminished node, but it can be enhanced with what was considered a malefic in a chart. Okay? The ascending node, the north node, is said to increase or magnify a situation, where the descending node is set to decrease or diminish. Well, if you've got a malefic, it would be better if it were diminished in its capability. Okay? Using my own chart. I have the descending node with Hades. Now, Hades is not something everybody practices with. I do. But what it has meant to me is it really, even in high school already, it has really put in a major influence on my ability to do research. I was always a person who would say, I'm not going to take the exam, I'm going to write the paper, because it's just easier for me. That's me using Hades. Okay, with that said, my north node is conjunct Jupiter, but also conjunct Neptune. South node would then be opposite Neptune. And what that means is that you would think that that means maybe I could be deceived. No, that would be if they were the other way around, if the south node maybe were running with. But I don't even know that that would work, because I kind of feel that the south node in any proximity to Neptune is not more about deception, but because it kind of lessens it a little bit because it's Neptune, I believe that it made me more spiritual. So my Neptune wasn't used for deceptive purposes. It was used more for spiritual purposes. So I think that that's a big factor. In George's book, George White, the 1927 book, The Moon's Nodes, they do talk about buying and selling goods. And they talk about how when it's sort of like waxing and waning of the moon, but it's really good if the ascending node, the north node, is in a good place when you're trying to sell something, because people will pay more. But when it's waning, or when it's on the descending node, the buyer will tend to pay less. Okay? That's just how they figured it out to be. So for thousands of years, and realize that astrology is thousands of years old, and that the key element to how they did all predicting, natal as well as events, were always based in nodes. Okay? Boy, they could not only could they tell you when there was going to be an eclipse, but they could tell you what was going to be the result of that eclipse. Thousands of years. Okay? It's, it's interesting because they always saw eclipses as warnings. Well, we know today that it's not so much a warning, but as something that's causing us to grow up, to be a little bit more mature, a little bit wiser. That's what they're asking of us, the nodes. Okay? It's always referred to as the celestial, the celestial dragon that stretches across the sky. Also stretching across your chart. Always in the opposite place, right? North node, south node, they're just opposite one another. If one is 0 degrees of Scorpio, the other will be 0 degrees of Taurus. That's just the way they are. They always are going to be like that. Basically, what we're looking at is mathematical points. This is the point where the moon cuts the plane of the sun's circle. The moon's journey around the earth is very similar to the sun's journey, but not exactly because of the orb. There's like a 5-degree difference. As the moon does its monthly cycle, it will cross the circle, the ecliptic of the sun, twice. Once to the north and once to the south. There's your head and tail. Okay? Heights, and I talked about this in my first video, can be determined by the nodes. If on the main ascendant, a north node is very close to that ascendant, you will be tall. unless it's got another planet that would take away from that. If you have the south node to that ascendant, you could be a dwarf. But guess what? You could be famous either way, or you could be successful at whatever you do either way, even if you're a dwarf. Okay? Because it gives a degree of confidence, even if you're short. It's a little bit harder for short people to pick themselves up when they're down. We're going to talk about that. It's easier if the north node is there than the south node, but you still can be extremely successful. He uses a couple of comedians in the early 20th century who happen to be dwarves who were exceedingly successful. In our own lifetime, we have dwarfs that are exceedingly successful. Because if they're a south node on the ascendant kind of dwarf, they came in with a bunch of other stuff that's going to still help them be successful with that node. So it's great. It's actually cool to hear that, actually. So we're also looking at mitigating factors. So, for example, what mitigates a factor? Like if the south node falls with Venus, it's mitigating, it's lessening Venus. It means that perhaps they won't have as much opportunity. Does it mean that they won't find love? Now, in the book, it talks about how women might not get married at all, and they really judge the whole marriage thing on this. But I'm going to talk about modern day. I actually know a chart where this is true, okay, when the south node falls on with Venus. And it does make it a little bit harder. Does it mean that this person will never have relationships? No, they have relationships. They don't work very well so far. But I think it's because there's a bigger lesson here of value system. I think it's important that this person value themselves before crawling out into a relationship. And I think that getting one established in life before they find that relationship is key. This particular person has a north node. Now, the south node might fall with Venus, but let me tell you a little secret. There's good aspects because the north node sextiles that midheaven, very close. And that Venus that's here, it's also trining that midheaven. So that means she'll be fine. It means there's a lesson here, perhaps karmic, we don't know. And then, you'll learn it. Okay? It's all part of learning a lesson, sort of like my lesson to let go. It's been quite the lesson, quite the journey to let go. But I know, and I've known most of my life, that the sooner I can let go if something doesn't work, the easier it's going to be on me. And so I've learned that. And I think that this person is learning about not just love, but about money and relationships and about worth. All things related to Venus. The same thing is going to happen if the mitigation factor is, say, somebody is born with a south node on the moon. I don't think it really affects the moon. See how it kind of lessens it mitigates it. It mitigates it. All right? So then it goes on and it says that the tail is a little bit better. It works better if it's in Sagittarius or Pisces. As a matter of fact, the tail might even be elevated in those signs, meaning that it can work out, better. Pisces overall, whether it's the north node or the south node, tends to dull the effects of either the tail or the head. That's something to bear in mind. That either way, the sign of Pisces is probably not the greatest place for the nodes, either one, to fall. However, in Gemini and in Virgo are considered really good for the head, the north node. So if the north node happens to fall in Gemini and Virgo, it's like wonderful. But no wonder it lessens the damage of the Pisces and the Virgo, because so much went to the north node that it can't be that bad, right? Nodes in the first house give a sense of confidence. Doesn't matter if they're in the ascendant or not. It doesn't matter. Okay, that's what I was talking about with the dwarfs. They still do well. They're still extremely successful in life with that south node, okay? And it gives them confidence. And the same thing is going to be true with the north or the south node anywhere in the first house. However, the south node people, again, do not have an ability to pick themselves up and really elevate themselves in the same way that somebody would have with the north node. So the north node, again, here we go back to the timing element. There just seems to be more at the disposal of the north node than at the south node, which could be a reason for that, okay? When the moon falls within 5 degrees of a node, it can represent a total or an annular eclipse. So one of the things that the nodes determine is the strength of our eclipses. It can go up to 18 degrees. So if you've got some kind of, say, even lunar eclipse, but they're about 18 degrees apart, they consider that only a partial. Full moons, any full moon, is going to be 12, 24 minutes. In other words, the nodal part of would fall generally speaking. In other words, it can go up to 18, it can be all the way down to 5, but it's somewhere around 12 degrees, 24 minutes. The nodes are considered the most potent influence in a chart. Again, we're going back to more of an Eastern philosophy, but if you were talking about astrology even 100 years ago, it's amazing how much we like get these new things, and then we got Chiron, we got all the asteroids, and then we started to let go of the node. We really shouldn't do that, because the node still will talk about the journey of our life path. That's where the karma comes in. That's why it's important, if you're doing an electional chart, to really look where the nodes are. It tends to be the most potent factor into how successful a person or event will be. The north node benefits tend to be stronger than the south node when in good aspects to angles. Okay, in other words, they both bring you something, okay? But look toward the north node for the stronger, okay? Because according to this, you think of the south node as, look, it's going to be terrible, awful, and horrible. No, it's not. It's just a lessened capacity. That's all. That's all it is. It's diminished. It's less, okay? South node can have a negative effect in a chart when it comes in contact with, I think it's the moon. Yeah, it can have an effect in the chart on health and sight in particular. Now, he does a whole chapter on blindness, but he's using the fixed stars to kind of prove his point. And I'm not, Bernadette Peters, is that her name? There's somebody, I want to get her book. Bernadette, I don't know. I can't remember her name, but there's this really good book that I'd be getting. And when I do, I'll probably share it with you. But it's funny how when you're going through certain, like if it hits the moon or if it hits certain things, and this is like in the process of traveling through life, it can be an effect on health. And even if though it might be a transit and it might move forward, if that connection took place on a very young person, a child, it tends to leave an imprint on them that will then affect them permanently for the rest of their life. It's another reason why it's really important to watch these things. South node, because of its diminishing effect, is why it has an effect on health. So a south node to sun could have that. A south node to moon could have that. So that right there are the two areas where you might want to look where the nodes are coming or what's happening. However, the north node doesn't have much effect at all. It doesn't really give you better health. It just doesn't really affect you. Whereas the south node, the diminishing factor, does affect health, okay? So when we look at the nodes, we don't want to only stay with the fact that the nodes relate to karma, because we don't know where we are in that karma. So right away, that becomes iffy. And then we do want to look at karma. I mean, we want to look at the nodes not just as a cycle of karma, maybe that would be a better way to put it, but maybe as a timing factor, maybe as a factor of whether or not something would be successful in long term. Maybe we want to look at these nodes a little differently. The south node is not the be all, no, the north node is not the be all end all, and the south node is not the pits. South node does diminish things, but if that south node is running with a difficult planet, yeah, diminish it a little bit, right? It's easier, right? And if it's running with something that is a benefit, it's only teaching you a lesson about it, and you would look to the north node to see how it ultimately will work out. And if the north node is making sextiles and trines to the midheaven, or if in a chart you have it conjuncting or in aspect to Jupiter, which could be another reason why I didn't turn into a criminal, because I have both Jupiter conjuncting the north node and Neptune. So it was sort of like my way was to expand on a spiritual level. And I've dealt with some disillusion. I've been deceived by people, but I have to be really honest with you. I think everybody has. We all have a Neptune. I don't think I have been more than anybody else. So maybe the south node in opposition diminished it a little, or maybe it was Jupiter conjuncting that helped enhance it. Okay. I think that we can learn a lot about ourselves by looking at these little points in space, as I would like to say. And I do want to point out that some of the reasons why astrologers might have difficulty with these is because they are points in space. But I am speaking as a real modern astrologer who studies the trans-Neptunians, the parts of fortune, part of spirit, part of death, so all of those are mathematical configurations. They are not planets. They're not bodies. So, but they're valid and they work, and they've been working through my life. So my feeling is this elliptic plane that everybody might want to poo-poo, don't. It really has a strong bearing on whether or not your journey through life will bring you lots of success, lots of challenges, or whether you will, just kind of mark time. Let me explain something to you here. One of the things that George White talks about in his book is the South Node as a factor in a total overall picture. Okay, I'll give you an example. People that have done pretty well in life, a little bit. I mean, one example, a woman who married fairly well and had, married a husband who had money or everything. But she ends up getting kind of greedy, wants more money, doesn't like that her husband's standing between her and the money, and she poisons him. South Node tells you she's going to get caught, and she does. And this is true of several other murderers' charts that he looks at during this book. And so he's not saying that the South Node in places makes you a murderer. What he's saying is that your choices may not be the best and you'll get caught with those choices. So it's almost as if to say, if you have a really strong South Node, I always thought of myself as having a fairly strong South Node, but my North Node is pretty strong too. But I really do feel like it's really important for me always to take the high road and to do the right thing and to be very good in my life. And I really took that seriously because I feel like if I did anything wrong, I'd get caught. And I think that that's the point of the North and the South Node. It's not about you being a good person or a bad person. It's about having opportunities or having to create opportunities. There you have it again. South Node might have to create them. North Node, they might be there. But it's also about if you do take shortcuts, you're going to get caught if it's a South Node, and you probably won't if it's a North Node. And although if a North Node has opportunities, they don't really have to take a lot of shortcuts. So it is a little bit about connections. It is a little bit about opportunity. And that's how it rolls. So thank you for watching this video. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully it clarifies things. And please write me. Please, you know anything about, if you know any Eastern astrologers, I'd love to hear about Ratu and Ketu, because I think that the Eastern astrologers put a lot of emphasis on the nodes when they read charts. And I think that's not a bad thing. I think that's actually a really good thing. And I think we could learn a lot from it. So with that said, as always, until we meet again, I wish you all only happy